if we have time. Tim, good afternoon.
Hi, Jim.
Okay, so the right to smoke, not in a room with someone else breathing your smoke, but should we really be trying to make the remaining 17% of smokers give up?
Well, the reason that we wouldn't, so the panel's been talking about the harm that smoking causes or doesn't cause to the public health dollar and so on, but the reason that we probably aren't obliged to respect it is that we have pretty good reason to think that most people who smoke want to give up. And so we're not respecting people's autonomy by respecting their choice to smoke. We're probably helping them do what they really want to do by helping them give up.
All right, so if you signed a piece of paper saying, listen, I do not want to give up, stop badgering me, would you be exempt in that theoretical kind of...
Well, when would you sign it? I mean, so the worry is that by the time people are heavy smokers, they're not choosing to do it. They are they're addicted.
Yeah.
And so the sort of the autonomy argument, which makes us think, well, we really should respect people's choices, provided they're not hurting others, doesn't seem to apply to smoking. It's
interesting, that John Stuart Mill.
Yep.
Argument. All right. Okay, so it's interesting to have your opinion on that. I'll get your opinion on this, if I may. From smoking to ash, a Roman Catholic MP in the UK has come to Parliament with an Ash Wednesday cross on her forehead. And before I ask Tim, I'll ask our panellists, is this worthy of controversy, fuelled in this case by the BBC, questioning her arrival in Parliament with an Ash Wednesday cross on her forehead?
I think these days, actually, if somebody turns up with an Ash Wednesday cross on their forehead, a reporter would have be justified to say, what's that? I don't think it's as common as it used to be. But on the other hand, I think that the Catholic observer of Lent was quite within her rights to have it on her forehead. I think it was a woman, eh?
Yes, that's right. There's a difference between what's that and the question, is it acceptable? Or however
yes,
the
there
BBC
is
phrased it.
Quite. And in fact, it may not be acceptable if you were, say, John Campbell, and John Campbell happened to be a Roman Catholic on Ash Wednesday. You'd probably suggest to him, if you were his editor, that because the show's now televised, he'd better explain right up front what's the dirty mark on his forehead. Hey?
He's a Scientologist, I think, not a Catholic.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the ritual, but, the best ritual to do with Lent is the Pancake Tuesday, and that gets forgotten too much. Because the Tuesday, you have the pancake, and on the Wednesday, Shrove Tuesday. Yeah. That's right. We should focus on that. Focus on the pancakes.
Okay. Dr. Tim Dare, just quickly, I know it's an interesting issue, but under what circumstances is the wearing of symbols wrong so that the BBC might be right to question them?
So I take it the only thing you can imagine is that they're worried about maintaining the secular organs of state, and the only thing I would have thought might be an issue is if you think that this is blurring that line, and it would only blur the line if people weren't entirely free to ignore it. And
yes.
Surely they will. I mean,
although you wonder if a Hindu woman would be questioned about the mark of the bindi.
No, that's right. So we shouldn't question either.
All right, thank you. Dr. Tim Dare, Paul Casserly, Kevin Milne, thank you both for being on the panel today.
A pleasure, yes. And I think I'm looking forward to seeing Paul with a pancake on his forehead.
Kia ora everyone, as you've just heard, the age of eligibility for superannuation is to be lifted from 65 to 67, phased in beginning in 20 years. The Prime Minister, Bill English, who announced this about an hour ago, is going to join us live immediately after the 5 o'clock news. We have reaction from other party leaders too, and also from you, the public. Texts, emails, all forms of communication, carrier pigeon, all gratefully received. Tell us what you think. The victim in the Dome Valley kidnap trial takes the stand today, and all accommodation providers say a proposal to put up their rates by as much as 300% to fund tourism is unfair. All of that and much more on a very busy Checkpoint tonight. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. The government intends to progressively raise the pension age from 65 to 67, but that won't start until 2037. Under the change announced by the Prime Minister Bill English, no one born before June 1972 will be affected. Mr English says the new policy will save the government about $4 billion a year once it's fully in place in 2040. He says people are healthier and living longer, so increasing the age while there is time for people to adapt is the right thing to do.
Good health is good news. It means we can enjoy life more and remain active in the workforce and the community for longer. However, longer life does drive up the cost of New Zealand super.
Bill English also says the government plans to double the residency requirements for superannuation, so applicants would have to have lived in New Zealand for 20 years. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff says a tourism tax on accommodation providers could spare homeowners a 2% rates rise. Ratepayers currently pay nearly $28 million a year for tourism promotion and infrastructure. In its annual budget, the council is proposing to shift that cost onto 300 hotels, motels and backpackers. Tourism industry Aotearoa says the providers could be facing increases of almost 300%, and the cost can't simply be passed on to customers. But the Mayor says the industry is making a huge profit.
Most of the hotels will be able to pass on the cost of that surcharge to the visitor. It's a common way of collecting some return from visitors to the city towards the cost of the infrastructure needed by those visitors and to the cost of marketing the city to those visitors.
Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff. A young woman says a man tried to break her neck before she was struck from behind with a hammer, and she woke 5 days later in a hospital bed. Nicola Jones, Cameron Hakeke, Michelle Blom and Julianne Torrance are charged with kidnapping and assault. The three women and another man, Wayne Blackett, also face charges of sexual violation. Giving evidence by audio-visual link, the woman told the High Court in Auckland she was forced into a car and taken back to Ms Blom's West Auckland home, where she was hit, stripped and violated. Later, she was driven to a rural road where a man she believes to be Wayne Blackett tried to break her neck and hit her with a hammer. Japan has lodged a stern protest with North Korea, and South Korea has called an urgent national security meeting after Pyongyang fired 4 ballistic missiles into the Sea of Japan. It comes days after North Korea promised retaliation over American, South Korean military exercises, which it considers a preparation for war. The ABC's Rachel Mealy has more from Tokyo.
Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says 3 of the 4 missiles launched this morning by North Korea landed inside Japan's exclusive economic zone. He said the latest launches of ballistic missiles clearly demonstrate evidence of a new threat from North Korea. The South Korean military says the missiles were launched from Tongchang-ri in the North Korean Republic, where a military base is located.
Rachel Mealy. Waikato District Health Board says the failures that led to a woman's death from cancer could not happen now. The Health and Disability Commissioner says the entire system at the DHB failed an unnamed woman and her family between 2009 and 2013. The woman had her appendix removed in 2009, but a lab report at the time revealing cancer was only seen by a junior doctor. When senior doctors and the woman herself found out about the results more than 4 years later, it was too late to treat the cancer. The Executive Director of Waikato Hospital, Brett Paradine, says they've apologised unreservedly and it won't happen again.
We have an electronic result system. We have a policy that says that junior doctors are not able to acknowledge histology results, that's the responsibility of senior medical officers, and we send out regular reporting at department and individual consultant levels of unacknowledged results.
Brett Paradine of Waikato Hospital. Busloads of South Taranaki Māori are in New Plymouth for hearings into Trans-Tasman Resources application to mine iron sands off the Patia coastline. The Environmental Protection Authority is considering a consents application that would allow the company to process 50 million tonnes of iron sands a year for up to 35 years. Ngāti Ruanui, Oamaru and Ngaroa Wahine are being heard today. Ngāti Roanui's Chief Executive Debbie Ngarewa-Packer told the hearing the company has not been transparent and it fears an environmental catastrophe if the application is successful. It's 5:05. To sport, the United States scored in the final play of the game to beat the All Black Sevens 19-15 and win the bronze medal playoff at the Las Vegas round of the World Series. The New Zealanders hit the front with a couple of minutes to play but couldn't hold out. South Africa beat Fiji 19-12 in the final to extend their series lead. The Black Caps fast bowler Neil Wagner is confident he won't be hampered by a broken finger when the first test against South Africa starts in Dunedin on Wednesday. Wagner broke his ring finger while playing for Otago in a domestic match last month. He's still got the finger in a brace, but says that's more for protection rather than recovery.
We won't wear it when I'm bowling. It's just a precaution for batting or obviously knocking it on against something, and also it's just with catching. So it's just, I guess, protecting as much as you can. In that sense, it's only been 5 weeks now, so don't want to get unnecessary blows on it, I guess.
Neil Wagner. Football Federation Australia have rejected a request by the Wellington Phoenix to have their A-League match against Newcastle rescheduled, despite Newcastle agreeing to the change. The March 26th fixture in Wellington is just 24 hours after New Zealand play Fiji in a World Cup qualifier. The Phoenix had sought to have the match played this weekend instead. And that's the news.
The waiting game is the age to rise.
Well, you'll just have to wait and see.
Not so super.
I listened to Bill this morning, and you wouldn't want to play poker against a guy who doesn't tell you anything.
Softly, softly.
Nothing for the next 10 years on age, and then we raise the age by 3 months a year over a period of 8 years, which would get us to 67 by about 2035, 2036, depending on when we start.
The Golden Years. Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, morning reports, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, David Cameron Smith explains how to boost muscle recovery and building for athletes and why ice baths don't work. And after 10, National Geographic fellow and photographer, conservationist and explorer, Christina Mittermeier. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Another short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel and Western Bay of Plenty fine, but rain developing in Northland tomorrow morning and elsewhere by evening with some heavy falls. Eastern Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Gisborne increasing cloud tomorrow with scattered rain from the evening. Waitomo to the Kapiti coast, including Taumaranui and Taihape, cloudy periods, scattered rain developing tomorrow morning or afternoon. Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington fine today, but rain spreading north tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, rain developing tomorrow morning, easing to isolated showers later. Otago and Southland, scattered showers developing this afternoon and clearing late tomorrow. Bulla to Fiordland, patchy rain spreading north today, then clearing from the south tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, mainly fine, but rain or showers from tomorrow. RNZ National, it is 5:08. You're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you, Anna Thomas. We begin tonight with the Prime Minister's announcement just an hour ago that the age of eligibility for NZ superannuation is to be lifted from 65 to 67, starting in 20 years' time. The phasing in is in 6-month chunks, beginning in July 2037, reaching 67 in July 2040. So if you were born on or after the 1st of January 1974, you'll be eligible for NZ Super from aged 67. Joining us live on the phone now, the Prime Minister, Bill English. You there, Prime Minister?
Yes, I am.
Thanks for joining us. You're on Morning Report this morning. National Radio's had a good day with you and we're very grateful, but you did say to them you'll just have to wait and see, and I think everyone expected we'd have to wait somewhat longer than this. What happened?
Well, we've been working on doing this starting with the caucus discussion about in early February with all our MPs because it's a fairly significant issue, and Cabinet made its final decisions about it today and we've announced it.
Okay. What are you announcing and why?
Well, we're announcing the increase in age of eligibility with a 20-year lead-in because we think that is a fair and balanced way to give people time to adjust. It reflects the fact that in recent years, what was a pretty alarming outlook for super is a bit more manageable, so we don't need to make sudden, sharp changes in eligibility for it or in the payment. we can take our time to get a change that people can adjust to. And I think the reason we've done it is because it's an issue where we need to actually do the right thing for New Zealand. You can get locked into electoral cycles where everyone has to promise before the election that nothing will change, and then after the election, of course, they can't change their view, and there would be a risk that we end up putting it off, and then there would be sharp, difficult decisions made later.
Is this a non-negotiable for you going into a coalition after the next election? For example, if Winston Peters wants something different, are you prepared to talk to him about that?
Well, look, we're not prejudging what's going to happen. Where there's going to be a lot of discussion about bottom lines this side of the election. In my view, in our view, it is a pretty fair and reasonable track for a change that almost everyone believes needed to happen sometime.
Yeah.
And I think the other political parties will, give it a bit of consideration. They'll test, I think, where public opinion goes on this. We put it up within 6 months of an election, so it can be tested by the electorate.
Well, Labor went into the 2014 election with something pretty similar, didn't they?
Well, they, as I understand it, they proposed a much quicker change, like getting to 67 sometime in the mid-2020s. But look, they had bigger problems in those other elections.
Okay. Having said that, obviously John Key was strongly opposed to the raising of the retirement age, and he was the superannuation age, and he was absolutely on the record about that, and he was clear and explicit about it, and it was a non-negotiable for him. His finance spokesperson, IEU, was pretty loyal around that, and when you were asked about long-term Treasury projections in terms of the cost of superannuation as a percentage of GDP rising pretty sharply, about 60% increase between now and 2060, you said the party's policy of leaving the eligibility age at 65 is fully costed, and it's in its forecasts, and it is affordable. Stephen Joyce said the same thing. Our view is retirement at 65 is affordable in the New Zealand context, despite those Treasury projections. What has changed other than John Key's departure?
Well, the affordability remains. That is that our announcement today makes it clear that we believe New Zealand can finance the current arrangements for the next 20 years. We need to be clear what it was that that John Key committed to. I mean, what he said was there'd be no change in the way National Super was organised and paid while he was Prime Minister, and at the time. That was it was certainly a decision I supported, and the caucus did back in 2008, because we needed to establish trust when there'd been a background of negative politics around national superannuation, and the National Party had been part of that as recently as the late 90s. So he was determined that people would trust the incoming government, and they did. And I think that mattered through the global financial crisis. We had our recession, we had our earthquakes, we had huge deficits, but at no stage was there any question or insecurity for older people, because the Prime Minister was so committed to maintaining the scheme as it was. Can
we talk about the cost of this? What is the cost as a percentage of GDP of the superannuation scheme currently?
Oh, well, it's around the 5% mark. It would depending whether you use net or gross.
Let's use net, because net's about 4.2, isn't it?
Well, there's net and gross, so we use the gross measure. But look, whichever way you measure it, it's going to. It has been increasing. And cash costs 600 or 700 million a year, and it would continue to increase right through to 2040, 2050, 2060.
And as a percentage of GDP, what would it be by 2060?
Oh, it would get to, well, in net terms, around 8%, and this change will bring that cost down to about 7.5% of GDP.
Michael Littlewood makes the point that actually, despite some of the talk, that even at 2060, it's still lower than the OECD average. In other words, he suggests the problem is not as significant as some people are suggesting. Diane Maxwell, for example, says it's a no-brainer that you raise the age to 67. What are the fiscals on this?
Well, I think the fiscals are, as you and he would and we would outline, that we're all looking at the same track of increase. And the question here is whether we can do something about reducing the trade-offs that would be required to finance it, because when you have it growing as a proportion of your economy and government expenditure, other things would have to give way. We don't want to have to increase taxes, reduce health spending, reduce education spending in order to focus solely on increases in superannuation. So that's why the decision we've made today is a pretty balanced one. It gives individuals and families time to adjust. It makes some significant enough change at the margin to the cost of super, and I think will actually enhance our sense that we've got a sustainable range of publicly funded services and entitlements.
Can we talk about the fact that you've predicated this on life expectancy? What sort of life expectancy figures are you using looking out to the long term? I think you're talking about 89, is that right?
Something like that.
Yeah.
I think between now and 2040, I think the life expectancy goes up about 2.5 years, and the age of eligibility would go up about 2 years.
Yeah. It's tough for Māori and Pacifica people, isn't it, who unfortunately still have a lower life expectancy. In Māori, there's a difference of 7 years, average life expectancy. In other words, they're getting less out of this, aren't they?
Well, there's two things here. One is that they are actually closing the gap somewhat, and we would hope that over the next 20 years, with a combination of all the different measures that have been taken, that gap will continue to close. And I think the second thing is we've got to be careful about generalising across these groups. If you look at Māori, for instance, the number who have got bachelor degrees has increased about 60% just in the last 7 or 8 years. So a bigger and growing proportion of both groups will actually be involved in work and lifestyle that becomes, pretty much the same as the mainstream Pākehā or Pālangi lifestyle.
Yeah, look, and the fiscals are interesting. You have some strong support. I mean, you have strong support from David Seymour and 100% of the ACT MPs, i.e. himself. You have Diane Maxwell, the Retirement Commissioner, Peter Dunn. I mean, even Winston Peters, we're about to hear, is not, dying in a ditch over this. But the fact of the matter is that you and I belong to a generation who went to university for free. In fact, as I recall it, we actually profited nicely out of university because there were no fees and we got a bursary. We're going to get super at the age of 65. We are now looking at a generation of young people who are paying a lot of money to go to university if they can afford to go at all, who feel excluded from the housing market and are now going to have to work until they're 67 to get superannuation. In other words, there does seem to be a disproportionate burden placed on younger and lower income people.
Look, I think the first couple of things here. One is their life expectancy and health is going to be better than ours because that is a decisive trend that's going on. Secondly, a number of those issues need to be dealt with on their own merits anyway, regardless of the situation about super. For instance, the housing market, where we need a system that does enable more supply and less volatility in the prices. And I think the third thing is these are the people who would be paying the taxes. And one of the things we can do is ensure they don't face an unfair burden of supporting more older people who are healthier, who are working longer, but would still be getting their national super at 65.
Did you want to do this earlier? And I know you're very loyal to John Key, both now after his departure and when you were Finance Minister, but would you have liked to have done this earlier?
Look, I think the time's about right, and we've just got a set of circumstances where we've had a change in leadership, where we've got an election that's only 6 months away, where there's some confidence in the country, and when there is confidence about the economy and the general direction, it's easier then to discuss change. So no, I wouldn't have wanted to do it earlier, but I think the time is right now.
The Prime Minister, Bill English, thank you for your time live on the phone. Then we'd love your feedback on this. Text us 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We are, of course, on Twitter and Facebook. In fact, you can watch us live on Facebook or Freeview Channel 50 if you're so inclined. We wanted to know what the Labour leader, Andrew Little, thought about the super announcement. His office told us he was preparing for a stand-up and was unavailable. We do hope to speak to him later in Checkpoint. But here, starting with Winston Peters, is what the other party leaders had to say when they spoke to our producer, Bridget Burke, over the past 45 minutes or so.
Well, let's say very clearly this, that it's pretty arrogant to say you're going to bind every parliament from election 2017 all the way to 2037. I mean, that's pretty, arrogant statement to say that. And so that's got not too much meaning at all. But I am pleased that they're going to raise the residency requirement, not to 25 years as we've argued, up from 10, but to 20 years. At least it's a step in the right direction, given that last year and the year before, when we were raising it with the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister in Parliament, they were saying it's not a problem and we were just making it up. Well, they just changed their mind today.
Peter Dunleavy, United Future. I think that the government's taking a very short-sighted approach to this. Changing the age is essentially a short-sighted measure. What you need to have is a much more comprehensive approach. United Future's approach of allowing flexible arrangements regarding superannuation uptake, a reduced rate at age 60 or an enhanced rate if you defer to age 70, plus compulsory KiwiSaver is the way to resolve this issue. It brings stability, it brings choice, and it means that individuals make the choice about their retirement, not the government.
David Seymour, leader of ACT New Zealand. It's not actually clear if Stephen Joyce is serious or if they're just having a laugh by saying that their big plan to deal with one of our most urgent needs is to start adjusting super in 2037. We have the cost of superannuation rising by over $1 billion a year for the next decade. We need to take action and give certainty now rather than trying to palm it down off the road. And of course, as a political strategy, it's going to satisfy nobody.
James Shaw, co-leader of the Green Party. This is like a lot of National Party announcements. It sounds like a big deal, but it has no real substance, a bit like swimmable rivers or predator-free. Because it doesn't start to kick in until after the baby boomer bubble has actually passed through, it doesn't address the problem that they say that it's designed to address. What it does mean is that Generation X, Generation Y, the millennials, etc., will continue to pay for the baby boomers' retirements, but then when they retire, by the time they get there, the age of eligibility will have increased. And they are also the generation most likely to be renters. So by the time they get there, they will be asset poor in a way that that current retirees are less likely to be. Attention should really be on the Cullen Fund. I mean, if we'd been able to keep up payments to the Cullen Fund, that would be $20 billion better off. And the whole point of the Cullen Fund was to address the affordability problem of the demographic bubble as it moves through. It also raises equity issues, e.g. for Māori, who have a considerably shorter life expectancy.
Kia ora, my name is Tirero Flavel, co-leader of the Māori Party. A bit disappointed in the announcement from the government today with respect to the superannuation, in the sense that our position was clearer and has been clear in the past around the belief that Māori have been missing out on superannuation because of our earlier death rates than most other people by probably about 5 years or so, and the feedback that we've been receiving over time on marae about the fact that Māori do pay into the superannuation fund and expect to be able to reap the benefits of it, but unfortunately it hasn't been the case. We would have hoped that we would have been able to get some time to have a review across the board, which might have included having the discussions around the impact of immigration and things like mean testing, but we never got to that. Unfortunately, we would disagree with the position being taken at the moment, but probably need to see the detail in the first instance.
Te Urura Flavel ending that collection of opposition party leaders and support party leaders talking to Bridget Burke, our producer, and we're hoping to talk to Andrew Little, Labour leader, a little later in the program. Interesting to hear that David Seymour thinks it's not enough and not fast enough. 5:23. What do you think? We'd love your opinion. Texts and emails already coming in. You can text us on 2101 or email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Now, all of this broke when Bill English made the announcement at 4 o'clock this afternoon or shortly thereafter at his weekly post-cabinet media conference, but we sent our reporter Zach Fleming out to the streets of Auckland CBD, very near to us here at RNZ, to find out what people heading home from work think about it all.
People are naturally working for longer, but whether they should have to is a different story. And I think that it's an interesting move. I mean, obviously we've got plenty of time to prepare for that, but I just wonder what it's going to mean for the average New Zealander and what impact that's going to have. I think perhaps, maybe once again, maybe it's going to drive more activity in the property market. We've already had a lot of criticism for, more and more activity in property investment driving the house prices up and taking first home buyers out of the marketplace. I can't see people now looking at that any differently, and perhaps even further it might fuel property price rises in particularly Auckland. It's just about the fact that, should people, have the right to, work darned hard and get to the age of 65 and get to the hang of their boots up, and people should have choice. And I think, if government now is making signals that choice is going to be different and extended, then they're just going to look to their own means to do what they want to do and take care of themselves, and they're going to look to different investment vehicles now that potentially they can be less reliant on super when they want it.
I'm fine on that because I have set aside funds for when I get to 65. I don't want them to put it up now, and those funds that I have got don't mean anything. So, yeah, okay, if he wants to give us plenty of warning, that's fine.
Does it worry you, for example, for your kids, they're going to have to be working longer?
Well, they're better off than I am, so... But, I mean, they're sensible enough that they will accumulate their funds to allow for retirement.
It has to be done sooner or later. Probably has to be done even to be even higher age than that, to be fair.
Just so that we can afford it?
Yeah, exactly right, yeah. I mean, 67's not that old these days, is it? So, but, yeah, it's going to have to happen realistically, and the sooner the better, so...
It's crazy. People are struggling enough. I know a lot of people at 65 now, and the guy is actually 70 and he can't retire, and he's driving buses. He probably shouldn't be, but he's been doing it his whole life. It's just crazy, really.
I guess it's unfortunate because it means we have to wait longer before we can retire, but I guess he's probably got his reasons.
I'd say it's probably fair enough, to be honest. We've got an ageing population. We have to kind of sort it out somehow. And I guess this is one of the ways that we can do it. I think most people aren't retiring at 65 anyway, or a lot of them aren't. They're working longer, so... I mean, it's annoying, but it's one of those things that was going to have to happen. Across the world, they've raised the retirement age. I'd say it's a trend, and I'd say we're just following the trend.
So that sample collected by Zach Fleming on the streets of Auckland, lots of feedback coming in. Most of it sort of seeing the merits of the idea in general terms, but addressing some of the anomalies that are very personal ones. John, I think the PM has got it right with the pension changes. As to means testing, forget it. Those of us who are not millionaires but have saved diligently for our retirement should not be penalised for doing so. Means testing is not being suggested, by the way. I'll be 42 this year. My older brother went to varsity for free. I had to pay. 3 years ago, after putting my one-year-old in full-time care so I could go back to work, I worked 60 hours a week and breastfed at night to do what I could for my baby. Against all odds, my husband and I have saved the 10% deposit required to buy a house. It was up by the government to 20% 2 weeks out from the auction. I would have retired in 20 years. I'm fine with contributing so everyone in society can prosper. But baby boomers really love to pull the rug repeatedly out from under my generation. Can you understand how tired we are? Says Lou of Christchurch. This is cruel for younger people, says Sue. They're going to have a dreadful time trying to get a house. And now no super to 67 years. And Martin says, yep, now people might live longer, but they'll probably pay about $10 million for a rat-infested dump in Auckland, plus will hardly earn any more. Thank you for your feedback. There's lots of it coming in. Do keep it up. 5:28. And what's been considered a clear slapdown of the US president, the FBI director, James Comey, has asked the Justice Department to issue a statement saying that Donald Trump's wiretapping claims are false. It's just the latest response following Mr. Trump's so far unsubstantiated claim, no evidence provided, that former President Barack Obama snooped on his campaign headquarters in New York last year. The White House is demanding Congress examine the claims, but the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, has categorically denied any wiretapping or electronic surveillance was carried out, saying he would have known about it. With more on this, here's the BBC's Nick Bryant.
Now on a special edition of This Week with George Stephanopoulos.
On the Sunday talk shows this morning, one main topic of discussion.
From President Trump, claiming the Trump campaign was wiretapped by President Obama.
In his extraordinary Twitter tirade, Donald Trump accused his predecessor Barack Obama of being a sick and bad guy who ordered wiretaps at Trump Tower in a Watergate-style conspiracy. And this morning, the White House issued a statement asking that as part of their investigation into Russian activity, the Congressional Intelligence Committees exercise their oversight authority to determine whether executive branch investigative powers were abused in 2016. But the White House has produced no evidence to back up the president's claims and seems to be hoping these congressional committees will come up with some.
Let's get the truth here. Let's find out. I think the bigger story isn't who reported it, but is it true? And I think the American people have a right to know if this happened, because if it did, again, this is the largest abuse of power that I think we've ever seen.
Senior Democrats have labelled Donald Trump the deflector in chief, deliberately distracting attention from the Trump team's interactions with the Russians.
This is, it's called a wrap-up smear. You make up something, and then you have the press write about it, and then you say everybody's writing about this charge. It's a tool of an authoritarian.
There were no wiretaps at Trump Tower, according to America's former Director of National Intelligence, or what's called a FISA court order authorizing them.
There was no such wiretap activity mounted against the president-elect at the time, or as a candidate, or against his campaign.
You would be told this.
I would know that.
If there was a FISA court order
Yes.
on something like this.
Something like this, absolutely.
And at this point, you can't confirm or deny whether that exists?
I can deny it.
This weekend has seen pro-Trump rallies around the country, celebrating his successful speech to Congress and a stock market soaring to record levels. But a week that began with a presidential reset has ended once again with Russia.
With Checkpoint on RNZ, thank you for being with us. 29 to 6, coming up on the program, the victim in the Dome Valley kidnap trial gives evidence. Thousands turn out for the funeral of former Silver Fern Tanya Dalton. Why Oamaru? North Otago could be the next boomtown, and police retrieve a body which may have lain in a crevice on Fox Glacier for more than 30 years. A former mountain guide tells us why the Southern Alps might hold up to 80 bodies. Nona is next with business, but first, Anna with RNZ Headlines.
The Prime Minister, Bill English, says gradually raising the age of superannuation eligibility is fair and balanced. The government intends progressively to raise the pension age from 65 to 67, but that won't start until 2037. Under the change announced by Mr English this afternoon, no one born before June 1972 will be affected. Mr English told Checkpoint the 20-year lead-in will give people time to adjust and reflects the fact that the cost of superannuation is more manageable. He says it is the right thing to do for New Zealand. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff says a tourism tax on accommodation providers could spare homeowners a 2% rates rise, saying the industry is making a huge profit. Ratepayers currently pay nearly $28 million a year for tourism promotion and infrastructure. In its annual budget, the council is proposing to shift that cost onto 300 hotels, motels and backpackers. Tourism industry Aotearoa says they could be facing increases of almost 300%. A young Auckland woman says a man tried to break her neck before she was struck from behind with a hammer, and she woke 5 days later in a hospital bed. Nicola Jones, Cameron Hakeke, Michelle Blom and Julianne Torrance are charged with kidnapping and assault. The three women and another man, Wayne Blackett, also face charges of sexual violation. Japan has lodged a stern protest with North Korea, and South Korea has called an urgent national security meeting after Pyongyang fired 4 ballistic missiles into the Sea of Japan. It comes just days after North Korea promised retaliation over American-South Korean military exercises it sees as a preparation for war. Waikato District Health Board says the failures that led to a woman's death from cancer could not happen now. The Health and Disability Commissioner says the entire system at the DHB failed an unnamed woman and her family between 2009 and 2013. Those are the news headlines. I'll be back with more news and sport at 6.
Thanks, Anna. Super age of 67. Dee says, I was the first generation to be saddled with a student loan. Can't afford a house where I live and work. Now this. Nona Peltier joins us this week, doing business in the Auckland studio. Nona, Oamaru Healthcare. Nice to have you back, Nona.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, Oamaru Healthcare. Now, that's the company, that's the Lumino, the dentist people. They have the dental...
Yeah, we've talked about these guys before, haven't we?
Yeah. So anyway, they have a shareholder who wanted to partially take over the business, wanted 50.1% of the company and offered, $10.16, but a share, but it was a difficult, hostile takeover, not helped by Oamaru, who didn't want to show them their books. So that was the reason why the partners, which is called Healthcare Partners, led by this shareholder, decided not to make a full takeover for the company. They said that, well, we weren't able to look at the books, so they weren't going to make a whole takeover. Anyways, the takeover, partial as it was, failed. Oamaru goes, phew, we're sick of that, so thank you very much. Goodbye. Now we're going back to our business as usual. So I think they're quite happy with that. But it's left them with a lot of costs, which they're going to be going after.
Yes, yes, that was a pretty nasty...
Yeah, I think it's, what, $377,000 left over of costs. So we'll see what happens with that. It's not over in terms of that, but I asked Oamaru if they thought it would make them more vulnerable to a hostile takeover, another takeover. They said, well, we should be asking Mr. Hudson and his crew there, and they didn't want to talk to us.
Okay.
So I don't have anything on that.
Building consents, what do they tell us, Nona? Because obviously the government's telling us building is taking place at a record rate and you can't walk in Auckland without coming across a construction site. What do the numbers say?
Well, if it is, it's not happening with the building consents, that's for sure. Yes, the building consents did rise over the last 3 months, but not in Auckland. No, in Auckland they actually fell 15%. That's 15%. So why, you might ask?
Why, Nona?
Well, I was speaking with an economist from Infometrics who's been looking at this, and they were surprised by the numbers too. You would have thought that the number of consents would have increased, but they didn't. They're down 15%, and the reasons behind that are the LVR, so it's those loan-to-value restrictions which the banks have. They can't lend a certain amount of money to 40% down.
That's right.
Well, we've just been talking about that, haven't we?
Exactly. Someone who saved their 10% deposit and it had to be 20%. Yep.
And, you know, rising interest rates, so even though we have low official cash rate, mortgage rates have been going up because there's fewer deposits. You know, they're chasing after yields. So a lot of complicating factors there, which is making it difficult for people to borrow money. It's costing more to borrow money. And on top of that, builders are struggling to get, you know, trained people to help them with the construction. So that's adding to the costs. Then there's the uncertainty, what's going to happen. You know, so as a result, not as many buildings coming up, not as many homes in Auckland. So yeah, it's not a good situation. That's not the kind of result that the government would have hoped for, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's worth repeating. Consents for new houses in Auckland down 15% in the 3 months to January.
That's right, yeah.
What did the markets do, Nona?
Okay, now interesting, our dollar fell a little bit now. The reason why, no one knows. It just did. No explanation there. Anyway, the US dollar was mixed after the chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve came out over the weekend and basically signaled that interest rates are finally going to rise there again this year. So we're going to look at about a 0.25 percentage point increase. And our dollar was weaker at 70.1 US cents, 92.6 Australian, 57.1 pence, still pretty strong there. The NZ Top 50 Index, it rose 0.25% by 18 points to 7,179.
Nona Peltier, thank you. Nona, it's 22 minutes to 6. A young woman has described being hit in the back of the head with a hammer, blacking out and being left for dead before waking 5 days later in a hospital bed. Nicola Jones, Cameron Hakeke, Michelle Bloom and Julianne Torrance are charged with kidnapping and assaulting the woman using a taser and scissors. The 3 women and another man, Wayne Blackett, also face charges of sexual violation. This is taking place in the High Court in Auckland. Our Auckland Court reporter Edward Gay has filed this report.
The woman had been working as a prostitute and living out of her car when she was lured to Cameron Cinnamon Hakeke's West Auckland flat above some shops in April last year. Giving evidence by audio-visual link from another room, she told the closed court how Mr Hakeke had asked her to pick up some cash for some methamphetamine and told her the front door was unlocked.
When I got upstairs, Julie was standing there, and because I haven't seen Julie in ages, I was like, oh, hi. And then she's like, what, is that all you can say? Oh, hi. And then Nikki jumped out from behind the door and took me down to the ground.
She said she was kicked and punched and then tasered on her arms and near her private parts.
Julie was sitting there smoking meth through the pipe, and she, like, after she finished heating it up, she then, like, rolled the pipe down my leg, and it burnt me.
The woman then threatened her with a dirty needle before cutting her hair, holding a knife to her throat and forcing her to sign over her car. She was asked by the Crown Prosecutor Brian Dickey what had sparked the attack. The The woman said Miss Jones accused her of contacting Child, Youth and Family and causing her to lose custody of her child. Miss Torrance accused her of stealing a ring and 2 hair straighteners. She said both allegations were false. They then drove her out to the Bombay Hills, where they dropped her, telling her to hitchhike to her mother's home in a North Island town hundreds of kilometres away. 2 weeks later, she was back on Karangahape Road when Miss Jones grabbed her by the hair and forced her into a car. Once inside, she said Miss Jones, Miss Torrance and a third woman, Jacqueline Keats, punched her repeatedly in the head.
While I was in the boot, I was thinking to myself, okay, what would anyone do if they were in this situation? So I thought, oh, that's right. So I started putting I rubbed my face with my hands so I had blood on my fingers, and I started putting my hands around places in the boot where I knew they wouldn't think to look.
At the house, she was taken to a basement area where she was struck with a cricket bat and stumps. She was ordered to strip and sexually violated.
I was then zip tied by my wrists like this, and by my knees and my ankles, and I was sat in the corner on the concrete floor, naked.
The woman said she was left there for about 20 hours. The only break in the monotony was when Miss Jones delivered her 2 pieces of toast and took her to the toilet. She also remembers a conversation that she could hear through the wall.
But then I could hear Nikki and Julie and Michelle saying to someone that they don't want to get caught, and then I heard Wayne say that, don't worry, we'll do it properly so you won't get caught, they won't even find the body.
The woman was then put into a tray of a truck and hidden under a tarpaulin. The Crown says Miss Torrance, Miss Jones and Mr Blackett drove the woman to a rural road in the Dome Valley area north of Auckland. After a botched attempt at trying to break her neck, she said she could hear the woman laughing and sniggering and talking about ending it all.
So I actually went to get up, and then the last thing I actually remember is getting a big massive hit to the back of the head with, I didn't know at the time what it was, but I know now that it was a hammer.
The next thing she remembers is waking from her 5-day coma in a hospital bed. 10 months on from the ordeal, she's still seeing a speech and language therapist. Mo te huataka o te ahi ahi ko Edward Gaya hau.
Some Auckland accommodation providers are facing rate increases of almost 300% if a proposal to fund tourism promotion goes ahead. The council is proposing to shift the nearly $28 million a year for tourism promotion and infrastructure from all ratepayers to about 300 hotels, motels and backpackers. The Mayor, Phil Goff, says hotels and motels, rather than ratepayers, are benefiting from the tourism boom and they should be left to pick up the bill. But as Sally Murphy reports, accommodation providers themselves disagree. They say the tax is completely unfair and in some cases may force them out of business.
Troy Clary and his wife run the Whangaparaoa Lodge Motel about 40 minutes north of the hustle and bustle of Auckland CBD. The proposed targeted rate would see their rates bill increase from $13,700 to nearly $40,000, an increase of 290%. Mr Clary says it's simply not fair for the cost to be shifted from all ratepayers to 300 businesses.
The whole thing with this targeted rate is it's not related to business levels. So in the winter, we may have a day that we have only 1 or 2 rooms. We're still paying that flat fee on, with those rates. If it's related to business, like a visitor levy or a bed tax would be, then we'll pay proportionate amounts based on that.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says the proposal would spare homeowners a rates increase of up to 2%.
Most of the hotels will be able to pass on the cost of that surcharge to the visitor. It's a common way of collecting some return from visitors to the city towards the cost of the infrastructure needed by those visitors and to the cost of marketing the city to those visitors.
But Mr Clary doesn't believe the market would allow it and says a $25,000 increase in his lodge's annual rates would wipe out his profit.
Our profit for the 2015-16 year was $27,000. We took a salary, me and my wife, of around about $50,000. So you could say it was sort of close to $80,000 for 2 people working 24/7. If there was an extra $26,000 there, it brings it down to a level which is not really fair remuneration.
Millennium Corpthorne runs 3 hotels in Auckland City. General Manager BK Chu says the targeted rate would see its rates bill go from about $1 million to nearly $2.5 million per year.
Not equitable way of taxing just accommodation providers. We only account for 10% of the benefits that come from visitors. The other 90% goes to a variety of sectors in the economy. So that's a main thing. It's not fair.
Mr Chu says the rate would discourage hotels from opening or expanding in Auckland. He says the accommodation sector is benefiting from tourism, but the rate would not account for quiet times.
It's a very cyclical business. It's only the last 2 years that we have been having good years. If we remember 2008 global financial crisis, since 2008 until 2015, it's been hard going. So you hear hotels are having a good time, they're charging high rates. But what happens in winter? You get only $100 per night.
Tourism Industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says some smaller operators are looking at losing their entire annual profit if the rate goes ahead.
From the small operators to the bigger ones, they're all incredibly alarmed. I've never seen the sector this agitated and angry over any other issue. They're determined to fight it. We know it's unfair, and we hope that the councillors are prepared to vote down this proposal because it's simply a very bad idea for Auckland.
Submissions on the proposal closed later this month, with the council expected to make a final decision in June. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
The headlines are sometimes a bit gloomy when it comes to the future of regional New Zealand. Warnings about zombie towns, dying regions, shrinking ratepayer bases and that kind of carry on. As we reported last week, the Otago town of Cromwell is growing so fast they have an accommodation crisis. And now the steampunk capital, Oamaru, is on the up too, with foreign buyers sniffing around the property market, businesses expanding, investors after a buck. Our reporter Lydia Anderson headed to Oamaru to check it out.
20 years ago, you could be forgiven for calling Oamaru a picturesque but sleepy retirement town. But now it's a nature tourism drawcard and manufacturing jobs are increasing. Waitaki Mayor Gary Kircher laughs at the sleepy town memory.
I think if you talk to most locals, they see it as being a different town. You used to walk along the street and it seemed like you recognised pretty much everybody. Now you walk along the street and there's just so many strangers. As far as I don't know that person. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether they're actually just visiting or whether they are locals.
Property values across the Waitaki district have leapt nearly 11% in the past year, according to QV. Now, China's largest international property website, Juwai.com, has listed Oamaru as the fourth most viewed place in New Zealand, ahead of Wellington. The mayor says he's not worried about the international attention. Instead, he welcomes it.
What we're not seeing is huge numbers of Chinese buying up all our properties and the price going through the roof and making it unaffordable for local people. Hey, look, that's pretty cool. Pretty happy with that. If people are interested in Oamaru, they find out a bit more about it, even if it's just that they end up coming and visiting and having a look and staying. That's great.
An average three-bedroom house in Oamaru could set you back less than $300,000, still very affordable compared to Auckland's $1 million-plus market. Former Mayor turned Ray White real estate agent Alan McClay says he's had a lot of interest from Aucklanders as well as those further afield. In the past few months, Mr McClay has sold residential property to Americans and an Irish-Kiwi couple moving into the town, plus a large commercial premises to a Melbourne businessman. He cites dairy expansion in the district as a driver of the town's prosperity.
Like in the last few years, I'm sure that's been the driver for growth, for bringing young people back, for creating jobs across the board at a wider level than you'd think.
But it's not just dairy pushing the boom. Manufacturing businesses are growing too. The chief executive of Oamaru-based Whitestone Cheese, Simon Berry, says he was surprised by the increase in demand for specialty cheese that's led to his company announcing it's doubling capacity and expanding its Humber Street site.
When you look at the scale of things now, it's definitely, it's a little bit daunting, but at the same time it's exciting. And we've controlled the growth to a certain degree, and in the last few years it's been a little bit frustrating that we haven't been able to meet our growth targets because of our capacity constraints. So it'd be nice to move into a stage that we've got excess capacity.
And the expansion means new jobs, something Simon Berry is already getting calls about from workers as far afield as Tauranga. Another manufacturer, sweet maker Rainbow, is reportedly spending $3 million to triple production and may have jobs for some of the 360 workers from the Dunedin Cadbury factory, now slated for closure. Mayor Gary Kircher says the current growth doesn't put Oamaru in danger of reaching a population tipping point, and he's committed to making sure the town remains an affordable place. In Oamaru for Checkpoint, Lydia Anderson.
Coming up to 10 minutes to 6. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. A young South Island truckie is on a mission to highlight how bad our roads can indeed be. 23-year-old Jess Johns from Canterbury has been driving trucks for 70 hours a week over the past 3 years. She says she got so fed up with the bad driving she sees on a daily basis, she sent footage shot from her dash cam to police in the hope they might follow it up. But she told our reporter Zach Fleming the police say they can't pursue her complaints unless she goes into a police station.
I've had the dash cam for about a year, but I've probably in the last 6 months or so I've actually started getting into actually saving bad examples and putting them together and just showing people, show people from our perspective what we actually see. And I think for some people it sort of freaks them out too, and they actually realise actions that they sometimes do, they are actually affecting the truck driver as well. You mean, there might not be a collision, but, you've scared that truck driver and, ruined his day kind of thing. But yeah, I originally only got a dash cam just to save all the nice scenery I see to show my husband. I just think that it's just needs to be a bit more education out there, I think, and that's for everyone. It's not just car drivers, it's everyone in general, I think.
And so you've been trying to send this footage through to the police, but they need you to go down to the station physically, right?
Yeah, so I did send a couple to them just on the Canterbury Police Facebook page just to ask them and show them the footage and just say, is there anything you can do? Can you contact these owners of the vehicles? And they said, we can't use it off if you've sent it to us online or Facebook just because we can't verify your identity. And that's why you've got to go into the station in person with ID and make a statement. And, I sort of tried to say, with my job, I can't. I'd have to take a whole day off, and that could mean I've just lost 14 hours worth of wages. And yeah, that just really, really riles me because I know the IID website use that RealMe government verified login thing. And, when you fill out that online driver's report on the police website, I think they need to have like an upload option. You can upload a video to what you're saying as well, and just use that RealMe login so your identity should be verified.
Jess Johns talking to our reporter Zach Fleming. Tanya Dalton has been remembered as generous, life-loving and a friend of many people who was cherished by family, netball teammates and friends far and wide. Dalton, a former Silver Fern, collapsed while playing touch rugby and died last Wednesday. Hundreds of people were at this afternoon's memorial service at QBE Stadium on Auckland's North Shore. Sharon Brett Kelly reports.
Tears, lots of laughter and Tanya Dalton's favourite songs were played at the 2.5-hour service. A top netballer, mother, businesswoman and broadcaster, family friend Scotty Stevenson said she lived 45 full and fabulous years. The start of the service at 1:26 was significant, he said.
The 1, the date of Dwayne's birthday, Dwayne's sister's birthday and Taylor's birthday. 26, the date of Tanya's birthday and of Charlie's birthday. Add the 2 and the 6 for 8, put the 1 in front, and you have Maddie's birthday. 126, you see, represents the beginning of the lives of all in Tanya's own treasured nuclear family. And here today, as we mark her passing, we remember the life she lived, the life she shared, and the lives she and Dwayne created.
One of her 3 older brothers, Tony, said she was like their late mother Mary, who was a star, popular and competitive.
Certainly when God was handing out the sports genes between the 4 siblings, there's no question Tanya sidestepped the 3 of us and took the whole lot.
Brother Dave said on family holidays Tanya turned most things into a competition.
Tan was tough, a real fighter. This may have something to do with having 3 older brothers. I recall one incident when in a misguided attempt to slow her down, Paul retrieved his earling spear. It was a bamboo stake with a 6-inch nail tied on the end of it. He threw that, went right through her foot, and that was the only time that Paul ever won the race. But I mean, It only actually took her 3 days to recover.
James Iverson said the friend he called Special T was a mate, a buddy, partner in crime and one of the boys. He recalls her working 2 shifts at the same time in 2 Takapuna pubs.
So stashing her grain and grape polo in the garden outside the public bar of the Mon, she ran between the 2 pubs for the 4-hour shift. We sat there looking down the road, waiting for the moment she would come sprinting out the doors, forage around in the garden, find her grain and grape polo, throw it on, before appearing around the corner as if she'd been outside chatting to patrons the entire time.
Netball teammates said wherever Tanya Dalton was, there was laughter. Friend Bernice Meni said the girl nicknamed Teabag was an incredible athlete and a fantastic teammate.
I will miss those calls too, and texts, road trips, cup of tea catch-ups. Tan's always slightly late as she tried to pack so much in. Came charging in with some baking, that beaming smile and a huge hug.
Friends and family all spoke of the love, laughter and banter. The last words were from her 3 children, Matty, Charlie and Taylor, and husband Dwayne.
She was kind, joyful, friendful, never gave up.
As you all know, my mum was a very special person who was far from ordinary and always taking everything that one step further. Like ringing the hairdresser and going, "Yo, it's me. Got any free bookings?"
I'm so proud and privileged to call the most beautiful, gorgeous, amazing lady we are all here for today, my mum, my best friend.
She was my wingman, my soulmate, my lover, a mother, but ultimately she was my bestie.
The Dalton family is setting up a charitable foundation in Tanya's name, the Tanya Dalton Foundation, in support of sports training and development for underprivileged children. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Sharon Brett Kelly aho.
What a lovely package, Sharon. 3.5 to 6. Tonga isn't the first country that springs to mind when thinking about the Winter Olympics. But the Pacific nation is on a mission to get a ski team to next year's event in South Korea. 2 of the Royal Tonga Ski Federation's 3 athletes just got back from competing at the Nordic World Ski Championship. Makalete Stefan finished 105th of 107, and Peter Tauwhatofua, who you may remember as the Tongan Taekwondo flag bearer from the Olympic Games. A lot of people looked at that more than once, that footage. Finished 153rd of 156. But Team Tonga's manager and head of sports, Steve Grundman, says the results are good considering the time the 2 have spent skiing. Peter had only been skiing for 5 weeks.
It's very ambitious, to qualify. It's not that they can start due to exotic wildcards or something. They do have to go through the FIS, IOC qualification rules, and for skiing very, very tough. We want to improve, of course. We want to get better and better and better, and that is the mission. And this, I think, went out very, very well. Makaleta is skiing now for 2 years. She does that at the side. She also was injured. She had a broken leg until, unfortunately, in summer training on roller skis. And Peter Tauwhatofua stepped in with his first skiing experience in January 10th, and he only was on skis for 5 weeks. And for this, I think, for those circumstances, those were 2 very remarkable results. And of course, we want to develop further. Of course, we want to proceed and also improve our athletes. And this is the mission, and we are on a very, very, very good way there.
Yeah, it's obviously quite an ambitious goal for a country like Tonga, where winter sports obviously isn't typically one of the major sports.
Tonga does have very good athletes, mainly in rugby. There are very physically strong people. Of course, you have to see what is possible with the athletes, because mostly they, of course, have a certain physical structure. But of course, they are suitable for winter sports, and if you give them the time and also the proper training. But also we want to motivate, of course, the Tongan population, also the expert Tongans. There are a lot of Tongans living in Australia, in North America, and Europe, that also do winter sports, and we actually want to open the door to them if they want to do winter sports on a competitive level.
Tonga going to the Winter Olympics. The news is in about 45 seconds. Feedback. People do not get jobs at 65. The only people working after that are not core workers. Males who worked all their lives in labour are physically munted by 65. The answer seems to be to appropriate tax revenue and direct it to health. Joe Average pays taxes all his or her life. What a Clayton's announcement about super changes. All English has done is transfer the hard decisions to an unknown government in the future. Who knows what the economy will be like then. Lots of feedback coming in tonight. Thank you all so much for it. After 6, we're going to talk about going to talk with Andrew Little about the raising of the age to 67. He will join us and much more, including a Māori perspective on it, coming up.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The Prime Minister Bill English is calling his plan to raise the pension age fair and balanced. The government intends to progressively raise the eligibility for superannuation from 65 to 67, starting in 2037. The change will only affect people born after June 1972. Mr English says it's a matter of doing the right thing for New Zealand, and the 20-year lead-in will help.
We think that is a fair and balanced way to give people time to adjust. It reflects the fact that in recent years, what was a pretty alarming outlook for super is a bit more manageable, so we don't need to make sudden, sharp changes in eligibility for it or in the payment. We can take our time to get a change that people can adjust to.
Bill English says he's put the proposal up 6 months before an election, so it could be tested by voters. But the New Zealand First Leader, Winston Peters, has attacked the proposal.
It's pretty arrogant to say you're going to bind every parliament from election 2017 all the way to 2037. I mean, that's pretty, arrogant statement to say that. And so that's got not too much meaning at all.
But Winston Peters is backing the other announcement that immigrants must live in the country for 20 years rather than 10 to be eligible for super. The Labour leader says the government's proposal to increase the super age is purely political and he doesn't back any such change. Andrew Little says if National really believed change should happen, it should act now, not after the election in September. The FBI Director James Comey wants the US Justice Department to issue a statement that Donald Trump's claims of wiretapping by the previous president are false. It's the latest response following Mr Trump's claim Barack Obama ordered surveillance of his campaign headquarters in New York. Democrats are demanding the president provide some proof for the claims. Our US correspondent Priscilla Huff reports.
Democrats are incensed by the situation, saying that if the president's tweets are false, at the very least, President Trump owes Barack Obama an apology, with others saying these tweet storms may demonstrate he is not fit to carry out the responsibilities of being president, as he regularly makes false claims. While an increasing number of Republicans have said they've seen no evidence to back up the president's claims, but also they don't want to cover up. This is Priscilla Huff reporting from Washington.
Japan has lodged a stern protest with North Korea, and South Korea has called an urgent national security meeting after Pyongyang fired 4 ballistic missiles into the Sea of Japan. It comes just days after North Korea promised retaliation over American-South Korean military exercises. South Korea's military says the projectiles were unlikely to have been intercontinental ballistic missiles, a view backed by US officials speaking anonymously. A young woman says a man tried to break her neck before she was struck from behind with a hammer, and she woke 5 days later in a hospital bed. Nicola Jones, Cameron Hakeke, Michelle Blom and Julie Ann Torrance are charged with kidnapping and assaulting the woman using a taser and scissors. The 3 women and another man, Wayne Blackett, also face charges of sexual violation at the High Court in Auckland. Edward Gay has been in court.
Giving evidence by audio-visual link in a closed court, the woman described being forced into a car and taken back to Miss Blom's West Auckland home, where she was struck with a cricket bat and wickets before being stripped and violated. She said about 20 hours later, she was driven to a rural road north of Auckland, where a man she believes to be Blackett tried to break her neck. She blacked out after being struck in the head with a hammer. The Crown says the woman was hit at least 6 more times before being left for dead. Atu i te kōti mātua ko Edward Gay ahau.
The trial of a man accused of shooting and wounding 4 police officers near Oamaru last year was adjourned for the day before any evidence was heard. Reese Warren, who's 28, is charged with attempted murder, wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and using a firearm against a law enforcement officer. 4 officers were wounded after a man held out in a house for nearly 24 hours. The accused is representing himself. A lawyer appointed to assist the court, Ron Mansfield, told Justice Brewer that the accused had not had time to see new material the Crown intends to call in evidence and requested an adjournment until tomorrow. An Australian woman charged with the murder and attempted murder of her 2 young sons in the Murray River has been ordered to undergo a psychiatric assessment. The police were called to the scene on the New South Wales-Victoria border last Thursday. They say one of the boys managed to escape and the body of the other boy was recovered on Saturday. Both boys were under 10. The woman, who's in her 20s, has been formally charged with murder as well as attempted murder. It's 6:05. In sport, the New Zealand men's rugby sevens coach Scott Wardrum says ill discipline continues to be a problem for his side on the World Series. The All Black Sevens were beaten 19-15 by the USA in the playoff for 3rd at the Las Vegas tournament. Wardrum says he remains frustrated by cards and penalties given away by his players.
It's becoming a big area in the game, and yellow cards and penalties sort of costing teams that are making a lot of them. You look at South Africa, who have the least amount of penalties against them, and they're the top team, they're the benchmarks. So we need to get that right.
And Scott Wardrum, South Africa beat Fiji 19-12 in the final to extend their overall lead. The series heads to Vancouver this weekend. The Kiwis international Jordan Rapana has been warned by the National Rugby League for an offensive gesture to referees during Canberra's Round 1 loss to North Queensland. The Raiders winger was issued with a concerning act notice after raising both middle fingers at officials when a Raiders try was disallowed because of a forward pass. New World Golf #1 Dustin Johnson has won the World Golf Championship in Mexico City to give him his 2nd consecutive tournament victory. And Cairns basketball import Tony Mitchell's season-long NBL ban for throwing the ball at a referee has been reduced to 10 matches. And that's the news.
As well as coming out your wireless, Nights with Brian Crump is available online around the world, everywhere from Lagos to Los Angeles.
That's the bass crump, crump moves and the crump finishes that come. Like I say, it's a freestyle. And that means you can come up with moves, you can be creative, you can find the power of the dance, power of the crump energy.
Enter the Crump Zone, radionz.co.nz, or tune in weeknights after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato. Also Coromandel and Western Bay of Plenty. Fine, but rain developing in Northland tomorrow morning and elsewhere by the evening with some heavy falls. Eastern Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Gisborne increasing cloud tomorrow with scattered rain from the evening. Waitomo to the Kapiti coast, including Taumaranui and Taihape. Cloudy periods, scattered rain developing tomorrow morning or afternoon. Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. Fine today, but rain spreading north tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, rain developing tomorrow morning, easing to isolated showers later. Otago and Southland, scattered showers developing this afternoon and clearing late tomorrow. Bullard to Fiordland, patchy rain spreading north today, then clearing from the south tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine, but rain or showers tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas, and thank you for joining us. Nice to have your company. Andrew Little standing by. He's going to join us in about 90 seconds to discuss this announcement from Bill English. He's grasped the political football of superannuation, announced that the pension age is going up to 67. The age of eligibility will rise gradually from 2037, 6-month increments, and the changes won't affect anyone born before June 1972. Lots of unkind suggestions coming in about that, and baby boomers via email, etc. Bill English says the government also plans to double the residency requirements for super, so applicants would have to have lived in New Zealand for 20 years. The law will be changed next year after the general election, if of course Nationals still have the majority in government. At his post-cabinet press conference, Mr English said life expectancy had increased by 12 years in the past 60 years. and living longer was driving up the cost of NZ Super.
Cabinet today decided to progressively increase the age of eligibility for New Zealand Super to 67, starting in 20 years' time. The Retirement Commissioner recently recommended increasing the age from 2027. However, we believe that a longer adjustment period is fairer because it gives affected families and individuals more time to plan for their futures. The change will bring New Zealand into line with other countries like Australia, the United Kingdom, Denmark, Germany and United States, which are all moving to the age of 67. The change will initially save about $4 billion a year. Cabinet also decided to change the residency requirement for eligibility for New Zealand Super from 10 years to 20 years. The change will apply to people arriving in New Zealand after the legislation is passed. Other aspects of New Zealand Super, such as indexing payments to the average wage and universal entitlement without means testing, will remain unchanged. The changes we've announced, which we will legislate for next year, will more fairly spread the costs and benefits of New Zealand Super between generations, ensure the scheme remains affordable into the future, and give people time to adjust.
Bill English speaking at about 4 o'clock this afternoon. We've got a Māori perspective on this coming up because Māori life expectancy is still 7 years shorter than non-Māori life expectancy. So what does the Māori Party think of this? But before that, let's go to the Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Little, Labour Party leader, who joins us on the phone now. Are you there, Mr Little?
I'm here, Mr Campbell.
Yeah, this is odd, isn't it, calling each other Mr, but it's nice to talk to you, whatever we call each other. Thank you for joining us. What do you make of this?
I think if the case for the argument is about affordability, there's something that the government could do right now, not wait till next year, not wait till 2041, and that is resume contributions to the New Zealand Super Fund. This government hasn't put a single extra dollar into that fund since they became government. That fund's now $20 billion behind what it would be had they continued contributions.
Okay, fair point. But let's speak to the age of eligibility, because Labor went into the last election with this policy, right, raising the age to 67.
We went into the last two elections with this policy. I stood for the leadership of the party on the grounds that I don't support it and will change it, and that is now the Labor position. And I have that view because of the 20 years I spent working alongside working New Zealanders, many of whom struggle to get to 65 now to retire, and should not be in the position of having to work even more years before they get their access to superannuation.
Okay, so your argument is simply that the people who need superannuation most, as a general rule of thumb, live the shortest after they reach the age of eligibility.
Well, not live the shortest, but they are doing physical work. I mean, the classic example came when I met a lines mechanic a few years ago. These are the guys that shimmy up the poles to keep the cables in place and the power running, and they don't do it just when the weather's fine. They do it when it's at its worst. He was 64 at the time, and he said to me he'd just been asked by his employer to work till he was 70, and he told me, look, he struggles to do the job then, at the age of 64, and he just could not see how he could work those extra years.
Okay, this is an interesting situation. So John Key wouldn't raise the age, and he's gone, and Bill English is. Labor wanted to raise the age, but David Cunliffe is gone, and now you're saying no. Does this speak to the politics in all of this? In other words, we did an interview with Michael Little before Bill English's announcement. It was immediately rendered obsolete by Bill English's announcement. But what Michael Littlewood said is the real problem with superannuation is you can't persuade political parties not to be partisan about it.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't think that's at all fair. I draw on my experience. I draw on my experience of the lived experience of many working New Zealanders who struggle to get to the age of 65 now. And it's all very well saying, life expectancy is being pushed out, and it is, but bodies are still wearing out at pretty much the same rate as they always did. You can't work beyond your mid-60s if you've spent a lifetime doing hard physical work, and you shouldn't then have to wait an extra few years before you qualify for access to superannuation.
Okay, what about the fiscals? And it's the fiscals that people use as the argument, really, to justify raising the age to 67. Diane Maxwell, who is the Retirement Commissioner, says it's a no-brainer. You've got to put it up to 67. If we look, let's just look at it as a percentage of GDP. If we look at it at the moment, it's going to increase by about 60% as a percentage of GDP between now and 2060. We are shouldering people with a tax burden that lots of people are saying they simply can't meet. Government debt will rise. We simply can't afford to pay superannuation to people from the age of 65 as more and more people collect it.
So, the government is saying today that the impact on them is a saving of roughly 0.5% of GDP. So, actually, in the bigger scheme of things, that is not huge, and it is not a material saving overall. So you're saying we can. So you're saying we can afford to pay super at 65 as far out as 2040. And I think the other point I was going to make is that if you have a look at those calculations, they make very conservative assumptions about GDP growth, and you've got to look under that. I mean, there's no question. We need to change our economic profile. We need an economic strategy that's about attracting investment into the high margin, high value, high wage sort of jobs. That makes a difference to GDP. So I don't accept the sort of more or less static economic analysis that says that, GDP is only going to grow.
It's funny because David Cunliffe was running the fiscals, wasn't he? He was saying we can't long-term Treasury projections mean we can't afford this. Now, I know you're not David Cunliffe, and Bill English isn't John Key, and you're entirely entitled to change your party's policies. But the fiscals haven't changed. The Treasury projections remain the same. Super is expensive.
Yeah, no, so the Treasury projections are that they assume, very, very conservative figures about GDP growth. In the end, this isn't just about that, though. It is about fairness. And I think others have made the comment, too, about if you have those born after 1972 who are going to carry the cost of this. That is the same generation who missed out on free education. They've missed out on housing at the moment, and now they're being told they're going to have to work extra before they get access to superannuation. Everything about that age cohort is sort of turned against them. I don't accept that it is necessary. I accept that we can afford New Zealand superannuation. It is a question of priorities. It's a question of fairness too, and I stick by that.
Andrew Little, Leader of the Labour Party, thank you for joining us live on the phone at 16 minutes past 6. The Māori Party is disappointed that the government has moved to lift the pension age to 67 and had hoped it would be consulted. Both the Māori Party and Mana want the superannuation age for Māori lowered because they die on average. Māori life expectancy is still 7 years shorter than non-Māori. Our Māori Issues correspondent Mihinarangi Forbes reports.
Despite being a government support party, the Māori Party's co-leader Te Ururo Flavel only learned of the changes this afternoon, and he's disappointed for Māori.
Because of the average age that Māori are dying at the moment for both male and female, so disappointment, yeah.
Māori men on average live until they're 73, compared with Pākehā men who on average live 7 years longer. Mr Flavel had hoped the Prime Minister's comments about a reset meant a chance for his party to be part of a review where they would have pushed to drop the age for Māori to 63.
That there is a difference in life expectancy. Our people put in the same as everybody else. Most often don't get to see that money because they're dying a lot earlier. And as I say, that's why we've advocated for some years now to lower the current age.
His call to drop the age is supported by his new political ally, Hone Harawira from the Mana Party.
Let's be crystal clear. I want super for Māori at 60. Every Māori at 60.
Labour's Hauraki MP Nanaia Mahuta says if the super age was to be raised, there should be an opt-out provision. Ms Mahuta says at that point a calculation might be made to determine what percentage can be apportioned towards the earlier retirement age. But the Greens co-leader Matiria Ture doesn't support dropping the age for Māori.
I want to see a welfare system, an income support system that is simple and fair for everybody.
Mana Party leader Hone Harawira says other groups should also be considered.
There needs to be some serious look at what happens with working people in terms of those on farms, those in the forestry, those in construction work, all of whom also die earlier. So making sure that Māori get it, for obvious reasons, we die earlier, and that working people do as well.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, Bill English, told media he had spoken to the Māori Party about the proposal, but earlier this afternoon Mr Flavel wasn't aware of the proposed lift in the pension age. Asked whether the lack of consultation was mana enhancing for the Māori Party, Mr Flavel said that's up to voters to decide when they go to the polls later this year. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko mihi Ngārangi Forbes ahau.
Police have today retrieved the body of a tramper discovered on Fox Glacier last week. Access to the site was hampered by poor weather conditions, but today a helicopter was able to get the body off the mountain and the identification process is now underway. Police believe the tramper may have been there for somewhere in the region of 30 years. Peter Wilson is a former Fox Glacier guide. A short time ago I asked him how the body was found.
The body was found by a walker who just basically visited the foot of the Fox Glacier, and the body was just found under some melting ice. Because of course the Fox Glacier is retreating at the moment, and as glaciers retreat, it's often things are discovered.
So if it was at the foot of the Fox, many people would have walked past it over the years.
They could have. One of the things with the Fox Glacier is that the ice takes about 50 years to flow from the neve, or the big snow basin at the head of it, down to the foot of it. And the glacier has been in retreat, so there's not many people go to the foot of the Fox Glacier now.
Yes, okay. Let's talk about, would the body have been pretty well preserved in ice?
Yes, it would have been almost completely well preserved. Quite often, it does happen occasionally that climbers do come out. Climbers who've been missing, their bodies are found after many years, quite well preserved.
How many bodies are in there? Do you have any idea?
I think it's hard to get an estimate, but there are a lot of mysteries in the Southern Alps, and there could be up to as many as 80 people who are missing somewhere in the Southern Alps. In terms of the Mount Cook region and Westland National Park, probably not that many, but there will definitely be a few more.
Goodness gracious, up to 80?
Across the whole Southern Alps,
yes, which is a big area. And what would be the longest period a body has been in there for?
Quite recently, some climbers were found at the bottom of the Tasman Glacier, and they were believed they had attempted the Caroline face of Mount Cook in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and they were quite recently found. So climbing's been going on for 100 years in New Zealand.
Yes, this is terrible for their families because they simply disappear without trace. And so there's going to be decades of uncertainty about what happened to them exactly.
There can be, yes. It is a really sad, sad thing. I mean, for some cases, for the families, it might provide closure on what had happened.
Yeah, well, so
in other cases, it might also just reignite
the sadness,
reignite the mystery.
Yeah. This person had a backpack with them, I understand, still on?
Yeah, he did. He certainly was sort of in full-on in walking mode. Whether or not that sort of provides help on what had actually happened to the poor guy, we won't know till they've finished their investigation.
Yes, if they were in walking mode, you start to speculate that they must have slipped, or look, the speculation is pointless. What I guess the thing about a backpack is there's almost certainly some kind of identification in it, right?
There'll be identification. There'll be an idea of what was in the backpack, of what he was actually doing, whether he was just out for a walk on the glacier or whether he was doing something more extreme, such as going for a climb. That'll give an idea about where he was at the time he obviously fell into the crevasse or fell into the glacier.
Peter, this is a reminder again, isn't it, of how cautious, careful, circumspect, whatever we have to be in parts of the Alps.
It is. I mean, one of the things I would say is that we have probably over 300,000 Kiwis go tramping and climbing every year. There'd be over 1 million tourists who go for a walk.
Wow.
Accidents and deaths are still a very, very small percentage. I mean, we're down in it's 2 points in front of that number. It's pretty small. But yes, it is. There's always a reminder, and especially I think this guy might have been alone. That's the sense that we get. And heavy, hard ice country such as Fox Glacier isn't really a place to be alone. That would probably be the lesson with this.
Peter Wilson, who's president of the Federated Mountain Clubs of New Zealand, talking to us earlier. A Dunedin pop-up hospital for yellow-eyed penguins will close in less than a fortnight unless funding can be secured to keep it open. And it's got bigger ambitions too. The Yellow-eyed Penguin Trust, in conjunction with Otago Polytech, St Kilda Veterinary Centre and Penguin Place, has been running the 9-week trial, which has seen the hospital treat more than 10% of the mainland population of yellow-eyed penguins over just 7 weeks. Hospital coordinator Dr. Lisa Aguila says without immediate treatment in Dunedin, most of the birds she's treated in the past few weeks wouldn't have survived.
There are estimated to be less than 250 breeding pairs, so 500 to 600 odd birds are just left on the mainland at the moment.
Are there any off the mainland? Where is the main population?
So the main population is actually best in the sub-Antarctic, so down on the Auckland Island,
right,
Campbell Island.
Yes. Okay, so the mainland population, 250 breeding pairs, so they are in a precarious situation, aren't they, the mainland birds?
Definitely, yeah. Especially the last 5 or so years, we're just seeing a continuous decline in the population, and they're not bouncing back like they normally do, which is pretty scary, actually, at the moment. So
how many have you cared for?
So I admitted my 34th bird yesterday. So out of the 500 odd birds, that's quite a significant portion of the population.
Yes, so we're well over 10%.
Yeah, it's up there, and we haven't managed to save them all. But we've only lost about 3 or 4 of them. So we've had a significant number that we've been able to get back out to rehabilitation and then back out to the wild. So that's really, really good.
And what are they coming in with, Lisa?
So the most common injuries we're seeing are actually naturally occurring injuries, which is where the bit of a conundrum comes in, because we're seeing barracuda bites and shark bites most commonly. And obviously, these animals are having to deal with natural occurring predation out at sea, and that's really nothing that we can do to prevent that. But what we have noticed in the past 5 or so years is that the incidence of, especially the barracuda-type bites, have increased dramatically, and we are linking that to something that's happened out at sea with a food source, ocean warming, potentially climate change, which is meaning that the barracuda and yellow-eyed penguins are potentially competing for the same fish, and barracuda are quite nasty. So
yeah, they are. Yes, anyone who's caught one knows the teeth on those fish are...
Pretty much.
Yeah. And so this is relatively new, is it, that the barracuda are going after the penguins?
In such a high number.
Yeah.
So, it's been something that we've seen occasionally.
So who's bringing them into you?
So mostly it will be Department of Conservation or Yellow-eyed Penguin Trust rangers out there actually doing surveillance of the population. So I think that's one of the main reasons why we see a huge influx of birds at this time of the year in particular, is because it's breeding season and they're making sure that the chicks are healthy and everything. So they're actually out there in the field a lot more, checking on these birds. So the scary thing is when it's off season, I guess, how many of these birds are going unfound.
Yes. Yeah. So you've had over 10% of the population in, and you've saved, 90% of the birds that you've had in. So you've been doing good and valuable work, but it's coming to an end.
Yeah, so the Yellow-eyed Penguin Trust were able to secure funding for a 9-week stint, and we've done 7 weeks of those 9 weeks. So that comes to an end in a couple of weeks' time. So the penguins will probably still get injured, but there won't be any money sort of to keep me down south here anyway to look after them. So we'll go back to the kind of old version of sending them up north to Palmerston North to try and repair their injuries. And often the delay can mean sometimes the difference between success and failure, because just the logistics of getting a bird up to the North Island can mean that there could be a couple of days in between that. And that's when we find that sometimes these infections really take hold, and that can mean the death of the bird, because once the infection gets into a bone or a joint, it can be really hard to salvage those animals.
Absolutely. So it takes longer to get the birds to Palmerston North. Statement of fact, of course, it's just common sense. The infection can develop, which just sounds like common sense. It would also, it seems to me, on the face of it, make the whole process more expensive. You've got to ship the bird, right, or actually air freight the bird, don't you?
Yeah, well, luckily Air New Zealand are amazing, and they actually do all that transport for free, which is great. So to me, the expense is more just the stress on the bird and then the loss of the bird if it's unable to be saved. Yeah.
So what are you guys hoping to do? What would you like to do if you can secure funding? Is that create a year-round facility? Because they do disappear. I mean, they're there really in a big way during the breeding season, aren't they?
Yes.
And then they're not there to the same extent, are they? They disappear off and have their lives?
They do for a few months, and then they sort of start coming back around July, August, start looking for their nests again and build their nests. But my bigger project, which is running in parallel with what we currently call Penguin Hospital, which is our temporary hospital, is I've got a steering group of people working to actually try and get a permanent wildlife hospital down here. And so that will not just focus on penguins. It will actually be a facility that will provide medical attention and care for any native animal that needs care. So that could include the sea lions, and there's heaps of them down here, the albatross, Kiruru, basically any native bird, and penguins, of course. I mean, I think those guys will probably, especially this time of the year, be a pretty huge client, for want of a better word.
Dr. Lisa Gila, doing really good work there. Two pieces of feedback to end with completely different points of view. Brad says, on the issue of retirement, the facts are that the pension, if paid out from 65 to approximately 80, will cost more than the average person will pay in PAYE tax over their working career. We'll check that tomorrow. That's a fascinating suggestion. So the fact is that it costs more to keep the average person alive than they contribute, and that's before you consider they want healthcare, roads, education and everything else for free. Most of these people will be irresponsible and have been unlikely to have prepared for retirement, buying expensive cars, boats and other toys, and they complain that the retirement age is going up. Cry me a river, says Brad. Glenn in Karori says, hi John, I'm almost 58 years old and self-employed solo dad to my gorgeous 8-year-old. I earn $40,000 a year after tax and my rent is $370 per week, and I barely make ends meet. I love my work, but I will never be able to buy a house or pay for my son to get to university. I might be able to retire when I'm 70. The national government has nothing to offer me or my son. Thank you all for your feedback. Thank you for being with us. We will be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The age of eligibility for superannuation is to be progressively raised from 65 to 67, starting in 2037. Auckland's mayor says a tourism tax on accommodation providers could spare homeowners a 2% rates rise. And the FBI director wants the US Justice Department to issue a statement that Donald Trump's claims of wiretapping by the previous president are false. Our next news and weather at 7.
Worlds of Music is a world music program with a difference. Every week we present an eclectic mix of world music, fusion and folk roots from all over the planet. The program includes a variety of artists, interviews and musical curiosities. An hour of music from the world for the